What happens when you take a video game system that is pretty much perfect and make it even better? Well, we're on to part 2 of our journey through the world of Nintendo, and in this episode, Lou and I are taking a deeper dive into one of the most iconic consoles of all time, the Super Nintendo. From classic titles like Super Mario World and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past to a little more of a hidden gem like Earthbound or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters, it's not out of left field to say that the Super Nintendo was truly the pinnacle of 2D gaming back in the 90s. It introduced and perfected so many genres in gaming that are still around to this day. We're going to be exploring the unforgettable moments and experiences that made this console such a beloved part of our childhoods, from our earliest memories of the SNES to an evaluation of which games hold up today and which games are straight trash. So grab your controller, pop in your favorite game, and enjoy our discussion of the Super Nintendo on Generation S.
What is it?
It's time to go back. Welcome.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Generation S. It is a podcast about growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. I'm Dan Kemp, joined once again by our favorite resident Power Ranger expert, Lou Carnevale.
See, now we're talking about a system that has Power Rangers on it, so I feel like my resume allowed me to come on this show tonight.
Absolutely. And of course, welcome back. I'm always excited to have you on the show. And yeah, so this week we are talking about Super Nintendo. We're just going to jump right into it. So all month long, we are doing for Mario Day on March 10th, I decided, why not just talk Nintendo all month? So for the entire month of March, we're talking Nintendo consoles. Last week was the original Nintendo Entertainment System. This week, talking about Superpower, the SNES. Now, Lou, unlike last week, I did not own a Super Nintendo as a kid. I played it as a kid, but I didn't have one in my house. Now, you owned one, right?
I did have one. I want to say 92-ish is when I got it.
So, do you remember what the occasion was? Was it Christmas? Was it birthday? Just a whatever?
It was Christmas, and I know very vividly it was Christmas because we had one of those old camcorders once you put on your shoulder.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the time period where my dad would record holidays. And I remember very vividly watching that Christmas morning, opening up the system. The funny thing is, I remember getting the system, and now kids, back in the day, they gave you a full game. Not a download, They gave you a real game and 2 controllers. So that was a big deal, and it came with Super Mario World. Is it Mario or Mario? Getting it out of the way now.
The mystery goes on. I was hoping we had resolved this last week, Lou.
No, it just depends on the flow of the conversation. I got that Christmas morning, and I also got Turtles in Time. So those were my first 2 games, and dare I say, probably 2 of the best games on Super Nintendo. The Turtle thing might be up for debate, depending on, your age bracket, but I think Super Mario World is not up for debate. Everybody would put it in the top tier of Super Nintendo games.
100%. I don't know anyone that would have not put it in their top 5 or top 10. Even myself. Having not owned a Super Nintendo, I can safely say it's still one of the best Super Nintendo games that I've ever played. So, and then you got Turtles in Time. Oh, man, I mean, that's a pretty good little intro to the system there. Now, how long was it before you ended up getting more games? Was it a birthday, Christmas situation where it was one or the other you would get the games?
I think it was. I think it was mostly for those occasions. I do remember, my God, going to Toys R Us and getting like some cheap games. And we're talking like bottom of the barrel games like
Bargain Bin,
Chuck Rock, Super Alfred Chicken. Did not think I was going to mention those. Those were not on the list.
I've never heard of those.
There's a reason why you haven't heard of those. Those are games you play on your emulator. It was mostly for occasions. unless, like I said, it was something that was a little less expensive, or it was something that was like, I don't want to say like I really want this, but as a kid growing up, I didn't say that often.
No.
So like if the Power Ranger game came out and I said, Mom, Dad, I really would like that game, I probably had to do an extra couple of chores, but I got it. But it was few and far between. It was mostly for special occasions.
Okay, gotcha. Do you happen to remember what the next big game was that you got, like, that you didn't rent?
I think it was Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I remember getting.
Another great game,
yeah,
by the way.
Was not very good at it. I have a game I constantly rented, which was called Mickey's Magical Quest. It sounds kiddie-like, but man, was that a good game. It was made by Capcom.
So I played, I think it was on Sega then, the Castle of Illusion.
Yes, good game also.
Very similar. I don't know if Capcom made it on Sega because I don't think they did Sega games. Or no, I guess they did because they had Mega Man and they had Street Fighter. So never mind. It might have been a Capcom. I just remember really fun platforming, like just and hard, honestly, very challenging game.
It was. Well, Capcom was on fire at this point.
Yes, like early 90s was Capcom's jam. So shout out to Capcom for a lot of my early memories of video gaming on pretty much most of the systems I played.
Yeah.
Now, for me, so again, I didn't own a Super Nintendo, but I had friends who did. So I remember my earliest memories, I had to have been probably like first grade. And there was a kid that I would his name was, I can't remember his name, gosh.
It doesn't matter what his name is. See,
you know what, it does not matter. There it is. It doesn't even matter what his name was, but I hung out with him. We were friends for a little bit. And so he had a Super Nintendo. So I remember not only did he have a Super Nintendo, but he had like one of those big screen TVs.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, by big screen, I mean like, I don't know, it was like 40 inches or something. It wasn't like, for me, it was huge, but like by today's standards, it was not that big. But it was in his living room and he had the Super Nintendo hooked up in his living room. And so I remember I played Super Mario World on his big screen TV and it did. It blew my mind. It was, so I think, there was 3 games I remember playing at his house were my first games I played on Super Nintendo. Mm-hmm. It was Super Mario World.
Yep.
It was Bart's Nightmares. I think that's what it was called. Do you remember that? The Simpsons game? Did you ever play that?
There was a Simpsons game I played, and it was like a bunch of mini games.
That might have been it, where you're walking around as Bart Simpson on the city block trying to collect pieces of paper, and then like you go into like dreams, and you have to play through them.
Maybe.
Is that the one?
Maybe.
Well, that's the one that I played. It was Bart's Number. It's really hard. I wasn't a huge fan of it. And then the other one, he didn't own it, but I remember I went with him and his parents to the store to rent it. A little game called Donkey Kong Country.
Oh, yeah. I'll get into that in a little bit.
I'm sure you will, yeah. So anyway, we rented that. They actually let us hook the Super Nintendo up in his room and play it like at night before we went to bed. We got to play it on his bunk beds.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I thought it was like revolutionary graphics. And of course, all I had at home at the time in first grade was Nintendo. I don't even think I owned a Sega yet. So seeing a Super Nintendo, it blew my mind. And then the other person, I had a different friend in second grade. He was my best friend. And he had a Super Nintendo. So every time I went over there, we would play Street Fighter 2, like the original Street Fighter 2.
Ooh, 8 characters only Street Fighter 2.
Exactly. Like the only way you're fighting Sagat and Bison and Vega and Balrog were if you could get through them in arcade mode. Like you weren't playing as those characters. So we played that. We played obviously Super Mario World, Super Mario All-Stars, which was basically just a re-release of the original Mario games on Nintendo. And then I'm trying to think. I think those are the main ones that we played at his house on Super Nintendo. Oh, no, there was one more. I think it was called Legends of the Ring. It was a boxing game. And it was like an over-the-shoulder perspective, like almost 3D graphics-ish, but not. And did you ever play that game?
I did not.
It was great because you could play as like all these like old boxers, and that's how I knew a lot of these old boxers.
Sounds like something like George Foreman would be in.
And I'm trying to think if George Foreman was or not. I don't remember, but I remember like Marvin Hagler. You had Rocky Marciano. You had Raging Bull. What's his face? Jake LaMotta. Yeah. So you had all these different boxers you could fight as, and then like as you're getting punched, like the guys, your life bar would go down, and then your face would get all messed up, and it looked really cool. I was never very good at it, but that's just for some reason a game that I remember playing a lot with him as a kid. So, but yeah, never owned it myself until many years later when I got one at a garage sale, and by then I'd already played all the Super Nintendo games on emulator, so it really wasn't that big a deal anymore. But oh god, so many games that I played at friends' houses. Loved it. Always wanted a Super Nintendo. My cousin had it. Just I never owned it. My parents could never justify the cost because by the time I could have gotten one, we had upgraded to like PlayStation at that point.
Yeah, you jump from original Nintendo to PlayStation. That's a huge
Well, no, we had
jump.
Sega. We had Sega in between. We had Sega, but
Yeah.
that's the thing too, is we weren't allowed to get. If we had Sega, why would they buy Super Nintendo?
And
That
I was
their
the opposite
mentality.
way. I had the Super Nintendo, and my parents couldn't justify the Sega Genesis.
Yeah.
I got my Sega Genesis when I think like the Sega Saturn or Sega CD came out, and like the guy at work asked my dad, he's like probably like, "Yeah, give me $50 for it" or something like that. So it was it was like a hand me down from one of my dad's coworkers back in the day.
I'm sure I think honestly most of my systems were like garage sale purchases that my parents got us. So nothing wrong. It worked. So there's nothing wrong with it. You know what I mean? So why not?
Now a lot of my game purchases were, like I said, I remember those 2 games at Toys R Us, but a lot of them were from Blockbuster. Do you remember if you would walk into the Blockbuster, your local Blockbuster, they would have like a table every once in a while in the front, and it was like they were cleaning out their inventory. And a lot of those games were on discount because they were used.
We never rented games from Blockbuster because it was too expensive. We would go to the grocery store and rent our games. Did you ever do that?
No. That's straight.
So
that's so weird to me.
It is. No, I know. Like I would walk into like Hannaford or Price Chopper, and they had a whole section where you could rent movies and you could rent video games, and they were just sitting on the shelf like a video rental place would.
I mean, it makes sense. It's a good idea.
Yeah. You know, and so my mom would take us grocery shopping, so we had to help like with the groceries as far as getting stuff in the cart and loading and unloading, and you know, for our services we could rent a game. And so usually we would go Sega. Maybe every once in a while I remember that's how I played the original Ninja Turtles game on Nintendo, was because I didn't own it. We rented it.
Yeah.
And so we rented it from the grocery store, and that's how I played it. And then we got then we would get Sega games. Anyway, so we would rent games there, and then eventually would rent them from a place called Big Dog. No, did Big Dog Video have them? I'm trying to remember.
Was it a mom?
No,
and
I think it was
Big Dog Video.
It was. It was in Queensbury. It was in that shopping center where we're totally getting way too deep here with our local geography. But do you remember the old China Buffet shopping center in Queensbury?
Not really off the top of my head. Sorry.
Where like the Joann's Fabrics is, and Price Right, and all that. Yeah. So there used to be where Joann's Fabrics was a store called Big Dog Video. It was a mom and pop video shop. And now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think they had games there. I think that was just movies. Truly, I think most of my game rentals came from the grocery store more than anything else.
Mine were all Blockbuster, and like I said, they just had that every once in a while you walked in and it was golden. You got in there because it wasn't advertised, and they had that table out there, and they were some older games, but you know, they were downgrading from having 5 copies down to 2, so 3 or 4 were out on that table to be purchased, and they were relatively inexpensive, and that's how I got a lot of lesser known games like Super Baseball 2020 played by robots, which was ironic because in 2020 we almost had baseball being played by robots because everybody had to stay inside.
Yes.
But it was more exciting to go to the store, look at the box art, and get that game, and almost from a parent standpoint justify, hey, I'm going to spend $40 to $50 on this game. I'd rather put out another $5 to make sure he really likes it, as opposed to $40 to $50 and yeah, he doesn't like it, or he doesn't know how to play it, or it's too hard, or it's too simple. $5, okay, you like it, great, I'll go buy it.
Well, that was the whole idea of renting games. Yeah, like it was a try before you buy. So if you had the means to afford a game and you wanted to make sure it was the right choice, yeah, you rent it first, you try it out. Hell, you might even put a few hours into it and say, oh, this is great. And that was the thing back then, is like, how many games would you own and you would easily just go replay? Like these days, I mean, we still play video games, but how often do we really go back and play through newer video games? For me personally, I feel like I don't have time to. I'm always wanting to play something new.
Yeah, it's funny because before we started this, I said, I just beat Gotham Knights and I'm bored. I'm going to go trade it in because I'm never going to play it again.
Exactly.
That's a PS5 game.
But back in the day when you only had, I mean, let's say 10 to 12 games, like that was it. I mean, unless it was a big birthday or Christmas, like those were the games that kept you busy all year round. So you had to play them. And for the most part, they were very replayable. I think that, like, you know, going back to Super Mario World, it was a game that, you know, you could play through. And then once you beat it, like it was very fun to go play through it again. It didn't feel like it was like, you know, boring or repetitive at that point. It was always going to be fun.
It was. And games like that and the fighting games also. I think the Super Nintendo was the changing of the guard. Because
I think that generation was.
Yeah, that and Sega Genesis. because your fighting games were not, if you can even call them fighting games, on the original Nintendo.
Oh yeah, no.
They weren't. They didn't exist, and if they do, they were brutal. Like Karate Champ is terrible. Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. I think
they did make a version.
They
but that
did
was,
make, but it was very basic.
Terrible.
It's not that good. But the one on Super Nintendo is great. And then, of course, you have the Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. They're not arcade quality, of course not. But they were certainly darn good for the time. Some things have aged well, some things haven't. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But your fighting games really came into their own during this generation of systems. And to me, also your sports games did too. Because there's some game called NBA Jam that came out. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Oh, yeah. Loved NBA Jam.
Yeah.
I played that on Sega, but loved it.
I had it on, I played it on both, but I rented it.
Yeah.
But I think the sports games during this time period, although not great, there's a few gems in there. NBA Jam, NHL 94 is still beloved by many. I used to play Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball on Super Nintendo, and that goes into the N64 also. But their fighting games and your sports games during this generation, and especially on the Super Nintendo, in my opinion, really became, top tier. You had some good games in that genre on the system.
Well, and let's not forget like the RPGs as well, or even the platformers. Like basically, and we're going to talk about this again. It might not be me and you because I think it's just the last one for you today. But
fine,
when it comes
I'll show
to
myself
console,
out.
No. But no, my point being is, the last generation of consoles, the regular Nintendo Entertainment System walked so that the Super Nintendo could fly, right? And we're going to see that repeat again with the next console and the following console after that as we get into 3D gaming in future episodes here. But with this one, like, the Super Nintendo took everything about the Nintendo and perfected it. Like, it really is, in my opinion, because even though I didn't own it as a kid, I would say the Super Nintendo truly is the epitome of 2D 16-bit gaming. I don't think there's much you can do better.
No, and I agree. And I'm going to touch on the N64 for just a second.
Okay.
Because you said the NES walks so Super Nintendo can run and things get better. I disagree about one thing. If you're a fighting game fan, the N64 was terrible.
Oh, 100%, yes.
So if you're a fighting game, and then when you go to GameCube, Nintendo was like, no violence, nothing.
Yeah.
So if you're a fighting game fan, there is no Street Fighter on the GameCube. There is no Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat on the Wii. There might be now with the Switch.
Now, there was Mortal Kombat on N64, but it wasn't very good.
It wasn't. And there was a Clay Fighter, 63 and a third. It was stupid. It was terrible.
I never played that one.
Now
hold on a second.
Because they were trying to make everything 3D, and it wasn't that good yet. So, to me, if you're a fighting fan on a Nintendo system, Super Nintendo's the way to go.
I would agree. Except, and again, this is not an N64 episode, but I will just bring up this one counterpoint. Okay. Super Smash Brothers.
Oh, man, that's a totally different animal, though.
But it's a fighting game.
Is it?
It is. It's a platforming fighting game.
It's a brawling game. I think that's a technical...
But you can't call it that because that was the one that invented the genre. It's a fighting game. I know this because I just watched a whole documentary of it on YouTube where the guy was like, we designed this to be a fighting game that was easy to play.
Okay. I could see that. But other than that one game...
Yes, no, you wouldn't buy the N64 saying this is my fighting game machine. Now, that's the reason, again, kind of spoiler alert of my video game evolution, I went from Sega to PlayStation versus Sega to N64 because, unless you count the wrestling games, like you said, there's really no fighting games that you can play on the N64, so PlayStation was my console of choice for things like Mortal Kombat and Tekken and Street Fighter and all these other games. Marvel vs. Capcom. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was truly that. So if you love fighting games, that was the path you went. Same thing with sports, to be honest with you. Now, N64 had sports games, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the PlayStation had a better variety, much like in the previous generation, Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis. Sega Genesis absolutely had a better sports game lineup.
Sega demolished Nintendo.
100%.
And then take it one step further when the Dreamcast came out. Whoa, with the sports games.
No, Sega has always had the best sports games, and it is a shame that, they stopped after the Dreamcast because, had they continued in the hardware realm, I feel like they could have definitely been the sports console just because of the partnerships they had built up. But unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be. Now, when it comes to let's talk about the genres of games on the Super Nintendo. So we talked about fighting games, we talked about sports games. Now, did you play any RPGs? I touched on it a little bit. Did you play any like the Mario RPG or Final Fantasy, any of those kind of games?
The only one I played was Mario RPG, and I rented it, and I went, what the hell is this?
So, not a fan of it.
No, at the time, I just didn't know.
Yeah.
I've played it as an adult. Again, I go, this is a fun game. But as a kid, renting it from the store, I'm like, ooh, a new Mario game. Why is Bowser on the cover, like, looking kind of friendly with him? I'm like, wait, what is this? I didn't know. I'm not really a big RPG guy in general, but that was the one RPG I played, and I didn't know, but I do like Mario on the Super Nintendo RPG.
All right, one of my favorites, and it's a shame that it's not out yet on the Nintendo Switch, because if it was, that would be the game I'd be playing for the next month or two, because it's one of my favorite games of all time. So I mean, I think the Super Nintendo had RPGs, and they did that really well. Platforming, again, if we're comparing to Sega, and this is going to keep coming up, the Sega Super Nintendo comparisons, because honestly, I was Team Sega growing up, and you were Super Nintendo. I feel like platforming games were pretty much even with both consoles. Would you agree?
No.
Real? Well, okay. So did you play any Sega platformers?
I played Sonic, yeah.
Yeah, but Sonic was unique. There wasn't really something you could compare it to on Super Nintendo.
I played Vector Man.
I love Vector Man.
That's
hard.
A great game.
It was.
I played Vector Man. I played Comic Zone. I think that was the last Sega game I bought.
Oh, I love Comic Zone. Yes.
But to me, Mario and Donkey Kong Country are just they're in a different stratosphere.
Yeah. Now, speaking of platformers, though, and we talked about this with the last generation as well, Disney games, right? Because you had, and they've re-released them on the Switch since then, so they're popular.
I saw the Aladdin and Lion King.
Lion King, Aladdin. I guess I never played this, but Jungle Book was another one that was really popular, apparently. Honestly, there's a lot of Disney had like a corner of the market when it came to platforming video games, and it was, I mean, maybe they worked with Capcom, but I remember it was like the Virgin Mobile did like video game development. Do you remember that?
I do. Maybe they were the publisher and Capcom was the developer?
I don't know. Honestly, I can't remember. But I remember Disney platforming games on this generation of consoles was amazing.
They were good.
Yeah. Did you play like the Lion King and Aladdin?
I did play Aladdin. It was a difficult game again at the time, but it was a very good game. I do remember playing the Lion King at my cousin's house, and that was good also. And like you said, just Disney had some good stuff around this era. I think it was with the partnership of Capcom, or just the sheer amount of competition between Super Nintendo and Genesis, and if not between the two platforms, then just the sheer amount of games coming out on any platform at any time. The publishers had to be on top of their game.
So I think, and I want to get your thoughts on this too, because it's almost like a joke where like you have like movie tie-in games, right? Where you have games that are based on a movie that's in theaters. These days, that's like a recipe for just a shitty game. Like I can't remember the last movie-based game that I really liked, but back then, to me, I would get excited if there was a video game version of a movie that I saw or wanted to see. I was very excited to play it. And most of the time, I thought they were pretty good. I mean, I think there's definitely some exceptions to that rule. But what were your thoughts on, like, did you have any movie games?
Oh, boy. I didn't own Aladdin, but I played it, obviously, like I said. Geez, I don't think so. I mean, I think the closest is when they tried to rebrand Turtles 3 as Turtles in Time. I mean,
kind of.
I mean, that's the closest thing I could think of.
So, like, did you ever play the Home Alone games?
No, never played the Home Alone games. No, I didn't have anything like that, but I know exactly what you mean. Like, everything got a game. Everything got a game.
But back then, like, I feel like that meant something. Like, most of them were pretty good. Unless I'm just jaded, or not jaded, but like, rose-colored glasses, and I'm just thinking of the Disney games, and there were actually a lot of crappy ones too, maybe. But I remember the Disney movie games just being a hell of a lot of fun for this entire generation of consoles.
Toy Story. Do you remember that?
Toy Story. That was a great.
Good.
That was a great game. maybe it was just a Disney thing then. I don't know.
It could have been. I mean, now that we're saying it out loud, everything is Disney, and
Yeah.
maybe that little quality of assurance seal actually meant something to Disney.
Yeah. And I don't know. I just not now.
Hey,
obviously.
hey, ready? We're never going to talk about this again. You want to talk about a crappy game on a crappy Nintendo console? How about
Sure.
Waterworld on Virtual Boy?
I never played it, so I can't tell you.
I had a friend that had a Virtual Boy. Can I get
you really?
Can I get the Virtual Boy conversation out of the way? Be
Let's do
2
it, yeah.
seconds, the whole thing.
Okay. Yeah.
That rich friend that everybody had growing up, he had the Virtual Boy. I played Waterworld, and I played I don't know what the game was called. It was the Mario game, but it was based like off of the old arcade game back in the day. I maybe played everything for a half hour and got my eyes hurt.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Well, because they hadn't really figured it out yet. The 3D was the red. It was just, it was straining in the eyes. I never played a Virtual Boy. I've never even been like tempted to. Now that I've done like actual VR stuff, like I'm just not interested. So if you're listening to this and you had a Virtual Boy, I'm sorry. And if you loved it, why? I don't get it.
Why? Because
anyway.
it probably gets them a good amount of money now if they go to sell it.
Well, and that's probably true too. Yeah,
so see, we knocked off another console. We're done with Virtual Boy.
Yes. Yeah, there we go. There's our charitable donation to this episode as we brought up the Virtual Boy. So, all right. Well, listen, we talked about some of our favorites. You touched on it already once, but I want you to tell the story because I know this story. But in case people didn't listen to our first video game episode from like 6 months ago, let's talk about your Donkey Kong Country experience because I love this story.
Oh, yeah. Donkey Kong Country. I remember going to Blockbuster to try to rent it, and it was just always out. It was always rented, and it just kept going, and eventually I found it, and I got to play it. I played it like one time, and I go, I love this game. It was phenomenal. Absolutely loved it. The graphics, the simplicity of it, but yet all like the little bonuses. You got to ride like the little characters like the Rhino and the Barracuda guy. The soundtrack was also very good. It was such a great game. Number 2 came out, and I rented it, and I had a game that somebody had before me, and they had beaten it. So I went to go play that saved game data, and I beat it, and my mom saw me beat it. She's like, well, guess what you're not getting for Christmas? I go, oh, okay. And guess what? I never got it. Never got it. I bought it in New York City, like the summer before COVID happened at Video Games New York. Hopefully they're still in business. And I got it. It was like a $30 actual cartridge, and I just wanted it to finish the trilogy because I got number 1 and number 3 of Donkey Kong Country. But man, I really love that. But that's a 90s thing. That's a 90s story of I couldn't find it at Blockbuster. I got it. I liked it. Then I bought it. And then I rented the next one. And I beat it, and I shouldn't have beaten it. And my parents said, no, tough too bad, you're not going to get it. I mean, you can't get that now.
No,
for what it's worth. Whether it's stupid, and there's probably someone go, who gives a crap? Fine, I understand. But unless you lived it, and you can remember those memories, it was different. It was a different time.
Yeah, it was truly kind of the end of an era when it came to, well, the end, it was the start and end of an era because our generation prior to us didn't have that opportunity with games either. It was truly an us thing. It was a Generation S thing, right?
It really was.
So, and then did you touch on the third one? Because they made 3 of them for the Super Nintendo,
I did.
right?
I did have the third one. I think I just got it, bought it. I don't remember. That's the weird thing, and maybe you have this also. It's like some things. Like, I remember getting the system because I've seen the footage of it, but I don't remember getting Donkey Kong Country 3. I had it, but I remember getting Chuck Rock and Super Alfred Chicken. How the hell does that happen?
It's just, your memories, core memories tied to whatever it is that you were doing at the time.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to be, at the forefront. That's my guess. Because I certainly have games like that. Like, I don't remember getting this game, but I had it, especially on Nintendo. I had like dozens of Nintendo games. I don't remember getting any of them. So honestly, those, in all seriousness, it might have just been there when I was born. So, in my defense, they were already there.
Yeah, these definitely were not, though, for me.
Yeah, well, no, because you got the console as part of Christmas and all that stuff. So how would you compare, like, in terms of if you had to pick one over the other, Donkey Kong Country, any of the Donkey Kong Countries, Super Mario World, which one is going to come out on top there?
That's tough.
Yeah.
I still would have to go with Super Mario World.
Just from a longevity standpoint, or
yeah, longevity, and also to me, all those little red dots that you would see in those overworld maps.
Yeah.
It was like a little bonus to try to find what was hidden and figure it out, and the maps and those little star thingies that would teleport you. So it was big. Now, you take away all those extra bonus things and just the core game itself, I think they're pretty similar in terms of enjoyability, but those little secrets in each level and connecting them and the Yoshi and all this other stuff, the extra stuff that Nintendo's known for, that Mario is known for, puts it over the top for me. To me, it is if I had to pick the traditional game to show somebody that's younger, that's like maybe 12, 14 years old right now, that's like wants to get into retro gaming, I would take Super Mario World and go, this is it. This is the definitive old school game that is not super difficult, but not a cakewalk either. You could beat the game and not touch any of the secrets and just go through it, or you can get the secrets. You're not going to get super frustrated, but it'll be more enjoyable. That's the game.
It is the measuring stick by which you compare all other Super Nintendo games in terms of replayability, graphics, fun. Like, it's the standard.
I would say it's any cartridge-based video game standard.
That's fair. I think it's a fair assessment.
Yeah. So even Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis, sorry, I would count.
No.
That still is the pinnacle.
No, that's fair. I can definitely see that, especially next week when I talk about N64. I'm not gonna be nostalgic about that. I'm not gonna be polite about that. There's a lot of things that I hate about the N64 even now. So.
Really?
Oh God, yeah. No, I mean, listen, I love the N64, but God, there's so much that sucks about that playing it now.
I think it's a little bit of an overrated system.
Well, now in hindsight, 100%. But again,
at the time, it was amazing.
Well, and it walked so that the GameCube could fly, and it's just a shame that the GameCube didn't.
Did
do
it
much
though?
better.
I don't think the GameCube flew. I think the GameCube kind of fell.
Well, it fell, but it wasn't the games and the quality fault. It was the marketing fault.
Yeah.
But so going back though, because I wanna weigh on this Donkey Kong Country versus Super Nintendo, because I played Donkey Kong Country, and the first thing I'll tell you is that it looks amazing, and it felt like I was playing a cartoon. I think that was the coolest thing, is that I felt like I was watching myself, like watching a movie or a TV show of gorillas running around in the jungle. So I'll say that. It looked amazing. It was way too hard for me, though.
Really?
I was never very good. Because it was such a precise platformer. You had to jump at the right spot.
On the vines and everything?
On the vines, on the mine carts, jumping on...
mine cart. Wow. Yeah, my dad loved the mine cart level. Absolutely loved it.
It's torture. It's not fun.
What about when you're in like the barrels and they're spinning? Or they're going up and down, you got to time it to hit the other barrel?
That I was actually okay at.
Okay.
Of all the things, I was good at that. But like, I'm thinking more like, okay, there's a big wide gap, and the only way to get across is to bounce off of this floating bee.
Yes.
If you don't land right on his head, you're dead.
Yep.
Or you fall. So I'm like, you know what? Screw that. I don't want to play this anymore. So that's how I would get all the time with Donkey Kong Country. I never got that with Mario. So for me, I think Mario is absolutely going to come out on top for me in terms of just fun, replayable, easy to play. It's an easy to learn, hard to master game, whereas Donkey Kong's learning curve was just too high for me at the time. Even now, it's really hard, don't get me wrong, but it's maybe a little more manageable as an adult that has played his fair share of platforming games.
I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, listen, let's talk. There's not much to say here, but I have it listed. Let's talk about any accessories. And there were accessories. I didn't have any of them, but so, like, the first one I think of is, we talked about the Zapper last week. So, like, you remember the Super Scope?
I do. I borrowed it from a friend or I rented it from the store. It was big. It was bulky. I just wanted my Zapper.
Cool.
It did. I just wanted my Zapper back, though.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for sure. Well, and I feel like there weren't a lot of Super Scope games.
No.
And again, I never owned a Super Nintendo, so maybe there were, but I just don't remember. Like, I remember with Nintendo, you had Duck Hunt, and you had all these war games that used the Zapper.
Rob the Robot.
You had Rob the
Robot. Did we mention him?
No, because we didn't have a Rob the Robot.
but
for
he's still
Nintendo.
out there. Rob the Robot.
I guess. Yeah, I know.
He's dangerous. Watch out for him.
Yes. So, yeah, the Super Scope. Now, fun fact, did you know that the Super Scope is actually like a weapon power-up in Smash Brothers now?
I do remember that, yes.
Which is pretty cool. So that was, I thought that was a nice throwback. Now, what else? There was another one that was really popular. Again, I didn't own it because I didn't know Super Nintendo, but like Mario Paint with that mouse.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Did you have Mario Paint? No.
I did not. And what's the Mario game where you can make the music?
That's Mario Paint.
It is a Mario Paint? You can make the music into?
You could paint, you could make music, you could do the Fly Swatter game. Yeah, it was, what people loved about that was, honestly, I think the Music Maker was the most popular feature of Mario Paint.
I mean, I've heard like legit songs reproduced on Mario Paint on YouTube. It's crazy.
You could go on, you go on YouTube and you just type in Mario Paint version of
Metallica
X song. Yeah,
Let's hear
whatever.
Enter Sandman on Mario Paint.
Yes. Oh God, if they remake a Mario Paint or a Mario Music Maker for the Switch, dude, I'd be all over that. I would have so much. And if you could like export it as like a song, I mean, shit, there's the new Generation S theme song right there. I'll make it in Mario Paint.
That would be great.
So what else was there? I mean, was there other accessories? Like I know I've watched my share of YouTube videos of like, I remember they had like a Super Nintendo built into a TV in Japan that never came out in the US.
Yes.
But like, was there anything else? Like, I feel like the original Nintendo had a lot more accessories on the market than the Super Nintendo.
I feel like when the original Nintendo came out, obviously, I should rephrase this. Looking back at when the original Nintendo came out, because I was too young when it was out in its heyday.
Yeah.
It feels like that Nintendo allowed a lot of companies to make whatever they wanted. And that's why you got a lot of crap. That's why you got this the headphone thing with the scope on it. You go, fire, 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 fire.
Yes.
You had stuff like that sucked, and it didn't work half the time with a U-Force, or you had everybody making everything, and Nintendo said, sure, yes, make it, do this, do that. And it got oversaturated with garbage.
Yep.
And I feel like the Super Nintendo, they went, time out, hang on. Let's dial this back. Less is more.
Yeah,
because I really don't remember that much. But again, we're still at that age where it's mom and dad buying everything. There's no internet yet. So unless you went to the store and saw it, if a friend had it, there was really no way of doing it. But watch, as I'm saying this, there's probably an ad playing on the YouTube video that we're going to upload with all the commercials, and it's probably something that's an accessory. So it's basically me saying, shut up, that they're out there. But I did feel like there was a lot less.
Yes. No, I would agree, and I feel like the quality was higher. I think, and I think I watched a video recently, maybe this was Sega, but like a company made like a baseball bat that you could use as a controller to like play sports games, but that might have been Sega. I can't remember.
I think it might.
And it
have
was
been.
like had like a weighted thing in it, so when you swung, it would hit the button to swing at the same time on the screen. It was very, very early motion control. It wasn't even motion control really. It was just a controller wired differently than a normal controller, so it's not really the same thing. But because it was, I think it was even hardwired into whatever console it was plugged into. Now there's another game here we haven't talked about, and again, never played this to this day. I've never played this game, but did you ever play The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past?
As an adult, yes.
So never as a kid.
Nope, because even I wouldn't rent it because I got the original Zelda, and like I said in the previous episode, what I don't like even in games now is where do I go? So the original Zelda as a kid is like the epitome of post-traumatic, like, where do I go? What do I do? How come I don't start on the left and jump on Goombas and go to the right? So I didn't even try to play that as a kid. I didn't rent it. I didn't know anybody that had it. As an adult, I've played it, and woo, that's a good game. Yeah, that is a good game.
All right, well, listen, let's go through this. I want to get your thoughts on like the best of a different genre and categories. So here we go. We'll start with the best platformer on Super Nintendo.
It's got to be Super Mario World, and
I would agree.
With Donkey Kong Country as right behind it. And that's probably the only one I'm going to give you as a 1 and 2. Everything else, I'll just give you 1.
I just give you 1. Okay. The best beat 'em up.
Oh, Turtles in Time. My God, that's easy.
I was going to say, I assumed you would have said that. We didn't really talk about that, but that's a whole other genre, is the beat 'em ups.
Okay, so you're right. We didn't talk about it, and that is a genre I felt like that died with that generation.
With Sega and I would agree,
Yeah.
Sega and Super Nintendo were the last, because you had some beat 'em ups on the PlayStation and N64, but they tried going 3D. It didn't work out as well. Now, I will say you've certainly seen a big revitalization of the beat 'em up genre. And for those who don't know what that is, I want to explain what the beat 'em up genre is. So the beat 'em up it's a left to right game where you are playing as one or two characters. Usually they're 1 to 2 players, and you are going through usually like a city street to start out. And you're getting attacked by thugs, right? They're just random people on the street, and you're able to just punch and kick them and beat them up and just keep working your way through. So you're not jumping off platforms like Mario. It's basically a mixture of a Mario game and a fighting game. That kind of. You're beating up people with martial arts moves as you work from left to right, going through different levels. And again, usually it was always like dystopian cityscapes, because that was apparently a very popular, setting for these action beat 'em up
Final
games. Final Fight. Yeah, I have that on the arcade upstairs, actually. We have an arcade cabinet with that, and the kids love it. That's a fantastic beat 'em up. I still think Turtles in Time is better. I would agree with that. What else did you had? Batman Returns. You had Batman and a lot of superhero games for beat 'em ups.
Don't say Batman Forever.
I will not say Batman.
It's a terrible
Forever.
game, but Batman Returns was a good beat 'em up.
Yes, Batman Forever is an awful game. I think we can agree.
Yep.
So all right, so you would say best beat 'em up is Turtles in Time.
Hands
Again,
down.
I would agree with you on
I
that
think anybody our age would say Turtles in Time.
Yeah. Best RPG.
To me, it's Mario RPG, but I'm not an RPG guy, so take that for what it's worth. If you're not an RPG person, then it's probably that's where you'd want to start, is something with Mario.
Yes, and as far as RPGs go, it's definitely a very introductory kind of basic RPG.
Mm-hmm.
So not only with the elements of like Mario being kind of familiar, the combat system, the leveling up, it's all very basic, and it'll if you like that, maybe you're going to be more interested in like a Final Fantasy VI, or like another one I really liked actually was called Chrono Trigger,
and Earthbound,
which was. I never played, or actually, I started playing it like a few months ago on the Switch when they re-released it, and it's okay. It's not bad, but yeah, back in the day, I would probably say Mario RPG is my favorite RPG on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, mine too.
All right, here's where you might. Well, I don't think you're going to have to go back and forth too much, but fighting game. What is, in your opinion, the best fighting game on the Super Nintendo?
Oh boy, that is hard.
I think you're going to have a number 1 and number 2 here.
That's hard. I will say if you're just on Super Nintendo, Mortal Kombat is not that good on Super Nintendo. That is one of the few places that Sega beat it.
Because they were allowed to have blood.
Yeah, and it just flowed better. Mortal Kombat was not a good console release in terms of how
the original Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, well, yeah, the original Mortal Kombat compared to original Street Fighter 2 on Super Nintendo.
Yeah,
Street Fighter 2 felt much closer to the arcade than Mortal Kombat felt like to their arcade. And
I would agree.
The violence had to be toned down, which was Mortal Kombat, especially then. Like that's why you played Mortal Kombat. It was like, this is an adult game. It's blood and gore, and it wasn't there. So I think Sega won out on that. I mean, for the general public, it's gonna be Street Fighter. But to me, I think this is the golden age of fighting games on a console. So I lied.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go down the list and give you a few. Obviously, the Street Fighter games are there. If you're gonna pick one definitive Street Fighter, it's Super Street Fighter 2, the new challengers, either one.
Yep.
Either the new challengers or Super Street Fighter 2 is good. They introduced 4 new characters, introduced Akuma eventually, so that's good. It was made by Rare, which also made Donkey Kong Country. Killer Instinct.
See, I never played Killer Instinct, and I always wanted to. I never had it.
It's fun. It's going to be a dated game, but here's the thing. There's two ways of playing it. If you grew up playing these games in this era, you can go back and kind of enjoy Killer Instinct.
Okay.
If you have never played games from this generation and you're just getting into retro gaming, it's not going to be as enjoyable as Street Fighter or even Mortal Kombat because you know what you're getting with those.
Right.
It's not going to be the full-fledged thing, but you know what you're kind of getting into. Killer Instinct was different. It sounded different. It looked different. Those combos and stuff like that, that's what they hyped themselves up as. I liked it. And I know what you're throwing up for me on a T. The Ninja Turtle fighting game on Super Nintendo is criminally underappreciated by both turtle fans and fighting fans. I think it's a good game. I know that.
I think
I know that because I won a tournament at Blockbuster. No, I lied. I came in second place.
Second place. And who is your guy? Who'd you use?
I used Donnie.
Yeah,
I used Donnie, and I was in the tournament at Blockbuster. I came in second place. They gave me nothing but a pin.
You got a pin. What did first place get? What could you have won?
I don't know. Maybe a game or something like that, or move on to the next round. I have no idea. But the thing is, let's say if I won a game. Let's say if I came in first place, you get to pick any game. You get to own it. Great, awesome. If I still had the pin, I'd rather have the pin. I don't know what the pin is.
Oh, it's probably worth a bunch of money now, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been awesome to have. But that game is criminally underrated. If you are into retro gaming and you like fighting games currently, I'm telling you, go back to Super Nintendo, either through emulation or if you're getting into physical copies. Try some of the fighting games not on N64. They stink. On Super Nintendo, I think it is the golden age of fighting games.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have to agree. For me, I would agree. Street Fighter 2 is probably the gold standard for fighting games. To this day, you could go back and play that on the Super Nintendo and not feel like you're playing something old on old hardware. It just feels good. So Super Street Fighter 2, the new challengers, because again, you got all those extra characters. Tournament Fighters, Turtle Tournament Fighters, 100% would agree with that as well. I'm trying to think of any other fighting games I played on the Super Nintendo. Those might be it.
I have another one I mentioned it before, Clay Fighter.
Oh, that's terrible. I played it on Sega. I hated that game.
It's bad.
Yeah.
It's not unplayable. This is unplayable and bad. It's just not that good.
It's not fun. And it's one of those where like it looks cool, and I remember the advertisements. I remember liking the ads for it more than the game itself. We'll just put it that way. I didn't it wasn't fun.
Well, that's maybe something we should touch on. Is
what's that?
What we mentioned, ads.
Oh yeah, we didn't really talk about the ads
to
at all.
Me, not only is this the golden age of fighting games on consoles, and again, I know we have Mortal Kombat that looks amazing now. We have Street Fighter that looks amazing now. But hey, there was a Power Ranger fighting game too. Tournament Fighters. Highly recommend that one too.
Yeah.
But to me, again, golden age of fighting games on consoles. The other thing is for the magazines. To me, also, this was the golden age of Game Pro and Nintendo Power and things like that. And also, the ads were so big. I remember some of these ads in Game Pro, seeing them, and some of them were awesome. Some of them were kind of sexy. Some of them were disgusting. It was the 90s.
Yeah.
It was all over the place. It was neon. It was gross. It was in your face. It was kind of pushing the envelope with the sexuality. It was wonderful.
Well, this was before Nintendo got, kind of very, not uppity, that's not the right term, but like very clean with their advertising. I think that maybe started more so like GameCube and beyond, because I remember, seeing ads for Super Nintendo games and N64 games. They definitely pushed the envelope. Same thing with like the Game Boy Pocket and the Game Boy Color. There was absolutely some questionable advertising that went out for those. And it wasn't just Nintendo either. I think Sega Genesis was right up there as well, whether it was the commercials or the magazines. I was just thinking about an old Super Nintendo commercial. Did you know that Paul Rudd was in a Super Nintendo commercial?
Hopefully it's on the uploads. on the YouTube
I'm sure
video.
it is.
What is it
it's
for?
the most famous Super Nintendo commercial of all time.
What is it?
It's where a dude, he's walking up to like an empty drive-in movie theater, and he boots up the Super Nintendo, and he's playing like F-Zero and Super Mario World, and he's playing all these different Super Nintendo games, and all of a sudden you've got people around him just gathering around him as he's playing on this giant screen, and then it's just like, now you're playing with power, super power.
Now I'm gonna have to like specifically find this commercial and play it.
It's
like,
so easy to
right
find. It's the most
now.
Yeah.
Right
It's the
now,
most
it's playing on the YouTube channel.
There it is. See, I told you, it's the most famous Super Nintendo commercial of all time. It's the one I mean, they always replay it. People will throw it up, be like, "Oh, remember this old commercial with Paul Rudd?" You're like, that was the thing. Like, so, but I didn't know it was Paul Rudd until just recently. But you look at it, it's like, yeah, that's Paul Rudd.
Paul Rudd doing Paul Rudd things.
Speaking of which, just watching that commercial, another game we didn't talk about, but I actually did play at my friend's house, and I totally forgot about it. Was F-Zero. Did you ever play F-Zero?
I played it a little bit, but again, same thing as you. I played it at a friend's house.
And God, how did we not talk about Mario Kart?
I didn't get that. There's still more things on the agenda.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well here we go.
But
Let's
that's
do
the
that.
thing. There's so much.
I know.
Good. There's so many good games, and if
Yeah.
they're not playable now because they haven't aged the best, you could at least there's games that were good at the time that didn't age well, and that was it. They're just kind of one and done. And then you have games like Mario Kart, like Star Fox, that didn't age well, but you could say, oh, they didn't age well, but okay, Mario Kart is this mega blockbuster game. Star Fox, okay, they were Star Fox, and they were Star Fox 64, and there's one on the GameCube, and da-da-da-da. It laid the foundation, and it kept going. So there's a difference to me than just, oh, it didn't age well, it's a one and done. These were not one and dones. They kept going for years and years and years and still haven't stopped, some of them.
Yeah. And you know what else I remember too back then was a lot of the game titles would put Super in front of them because it was Super Nintendo.
Yes.
So you had, well, obviously you had Super Mario Brothers, but that was already on the Nintendo.
Super
but you
Metroid.
had Super Metroid. You had Super. Okay, here we go. Do you remember Super Punch Out?
I do. I didn't like it.
I was not a fan of it
Me
compared
either.
to
Nope.
the original game. What about the Super Star Wars games?
Hard as hell. Did you ever play those?
I my friend did. I watched him play at a sleepover one time.
Oh my
and
God.
I looked hard. I was not interested because I'm like, this looks hard.
And you know what? I'm glad you brought those up because the term NES hard stopped when the Super Nintendo came out. Nintendo hard stopped here.
Most of the games were pretty accessible.
Yeah, they were pretty beatable, except for Star Wars. They actually made me like want to curl up and cry in a corner. I didn't like them.
Now, did you play those games as a Star Wars fan, or that's not what got you into Star Wars?
No, my cousin
right?
got me into Star Wars. He's about
That's what I thought.
12 years older than me, so I played them. I knew what was going on, but they just weren't for me. They were rather difficult.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right. Well, do we want to kind of talk about games that have aged truly the best, and then games that have aged like milk?
Sure, we could do that.
All right. What do you want to start with? You want to start with the worst?
We always end on a good note, so we'll start with
All
the
right.
worst.
Let's do that. All right. So you actually have a few wrote down here, so I'm gonna let you take the lead on this, and I'll let you know if I agree or disagree.
Sure.
Go
One
ahead
of
and
them
go
we
through
touched
some-
on was Mortal Kombat. I just don't.
Yeah, the first one.
The first
I would
one.
say the second and third ones play just as good as the Sega Genesis or are just as fun.
Yeah, the first one, the original Mortal Kombat, just nah, you're not gonna have a good time playing that. It's pretty dated in almost every way. Another one is, and this might surprise some folks, is Star Fox. I like Star Fox. Star Fox 64 is fantastic. Star Fox on GameCube, very fun. Star Fox, did not. It's just polygons. It's fun, but man, it's really rough. It's really rough. So that I have not played the second one. I know it's on the Switch. It's almost like a Super Nintendo exclusive on the Switch, on the the pay as you go, so to speak. What is that called on the
Switch Online?
Switch Online.
Yep.
I know Star Fox 2 is on there, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that was great, but it was canned because it was coming out so close to the N64 launch.
Yeah.
Another one that has not aged well is Batman Forever. Oof.
That's basically Mortal Kombat with Batman characters.
Yeah, it's bad. It's a bad movie, bad game. It was just bad. Everything about it.
I actually liked Batman Forever, the movie.
Ah, come on now. What are you gonna give a good review on that one? That movie?
Listen, if we're, I mean, okay.
There's your teaser. Come on.
There's my teaser.
There's your
Listen,
teaser.
So for the month of April, we're going to cover a lot of Batman territory because it's the 80-somethingth anniversary of Batman because he came out in April. So I figured what better time with the new Flash movie coming out and Michael Keaton coming back as Batman. So we're going to cover all the old Batman movies for the month of April. And I will tell you right now, yes, I look back on Batman Forever favorably. I just watched it a few weeks ago, and I still very much enjoyed it.
I got to say, I think it's the worst out of those 4 movies.
God,
yes.
No. When you cannot say it's worse than Batman and Robin.
Batman and Robin is the best, worst movie of all time.
No, I would even put Batman Forever in that category first.
No, Batman Forever is just a bad movie because it's taking itself too seriously. Batman and Robin knows it sucks and doesn't try to pretend it's something it's not.
I don't know. We'll see.
Either way, the game sucks.
The game is terrible. Yeah, we don't disagree on that. And it was like a not stop motion, but it was like the whatever they call it, whatever they used to make Mortal Kombat they did with Batman characters, and it plays like trash because it wasn't made by Midway, right? So they didn't really get the game engine down. They just got the look of it down.
Yeah, it was you're moving left to right or right to left in some levels as Batman, but the controls were terrible. Like you had to do a grappling hook. You had to hit like up and select at like the same exact time or a split second earlier. Who the hell is going to know that? Remember, we're kids. I'm not reading an instruction manual. I'm a kid.
Yeah, no.
And now I'm an adult. I'm still not going to read instruction manuals. But guess what? They don't make them anymore, so I'm fine.
Yeah. Oh, that's a shame too, because there were some good instruction manuals back in the day.
There were.
I remember actually, and again, I saw this years later. I didn't own the game or anything, but did you ever play the Home Improvement game on Super Nintendo?
I have not, but I know where you're going. Go for it.
Yeah, so the instruction manual, you open it up in the game, and all it says was men don't read instructions or don't need them or something like that, and that was all it said. So I thought that was pretty funny. But all right, so any other games that you feel? Because I agree with all of these, by the way. Any other games you feel like have aged poorly on the Super Nintendo?
A lot of the sports games have not aged well. Obviously, NBA Jam has aged kind of good. NHL 94 has aged good. I liked playing the Ken Griffey Jr. games. They have not aged good because they're fake characters. They had Major League Baseball, but not Major League Baseball Players Association. So they were just random dudes, except for Ken Griffey.
Yeah.
Maybe a Madden or two did good, but a lot of your sports games have not aged well. They were good at the time, and I still stand by they were better than your original Nintendo sports games, and you have your NBA Jams, and you have your NHL 94, but a lot of them did not age well, so I don't think anybody's going to be clamoring to play a large assortment of those old sports games other than the maybe 2 or 3 anomalies that have that retro feel to them.
Yeah, that's fair, and I would agree with that. Now, I think Sega's a different story. I do think Sega had some gems that are very replayable today from as far as sports games go. I think most of their sports games are still pretty fun. And it's been a while since I played a Genesis sports game, but I feel like I remember the last time I played it as an adult, it held up pretty well. So who knows? I might feel differently if I were to play them again, but I would agree. Most of the sports games back then, because, I mean, let's be honest, sports games these days are like eons above anything back then. Like, compared to any other genre, sports games have become truly their own thing.
Yeah, they have.
You know?
Too big. It takes too long. I don't want to play a football game and actually take me the time of a real football game.
Well, that's the thing. Well, I suck at them. Like I bought a Madden game thinking, oh, this will be like when I played on the Sega Genesis. Absolutely not. Like, not only do you have to like throw it properly and like aim your throw and like but you have to catch it at the right time. There's so many factors that it's such a big learning curve. It's not fun. Like, I have no desire to do it unless I were to literally like take a weekend and like play through Madden like for like 5 hours a day. Like, it's not worth it. And I'm not going to do that. So I might as well just admit that, like, the only sports games that I like are like boxing or UFC or like hockey, the NHL games. I feel like those are probably, for me, the most fun sports games to play on modern consoles.
I agree.
So, all right. Well, I didn't have much to add as far as games that aged the worst. I would agree with you on all of those. The only one I might add in there, and again, not that it's not fun to play still, but just because of everything that's come out since then, would be Super Mario Kart.
Yeah, I could see it. I could certainly see it.
If you had to choose between, and we're talking two older games that are really, you look back only a few years apart in terms of development. If you had to choose between playing Super Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo or Mario Kart 64, which are you going to choose?
Mario Kart 64, fantastic,
hands down. Yeah. I played it today with my kids. We were playing it on the Switch, and we had a great time. I would not feel the same way playing Super Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo. It's just not. It's fun. It's okay. It's good. It was great for the time. It is not. I mean, it's the worst in the series, but that's how it should be because it was the first.
Yes, I agree. And it's okay because it led to other things. Now, if it was a one and done, there was no other Mario Karts, it would just be like, oh my God, this is terrible.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100% agree. All right, well then we're going to end things on a positive note. The games, in your opinion, that have aged the best on the Super Nintendo.
So, Super Mario World.
Yep.
Obviously, Donkey Kong Country, I feel, has aged well.
Yep.
Turtles in Time, as Shredder's Revenge is proof, that just came out over the summer of 2023. Excuse
22.
me, 22.
Yep.
That has aged great as well. I'm going to say also Link to the Past, the Zelda game, I think has aged well also, especially for folks that, the new Zelda games are they're open world or this, they're that. Sometimes you want something a little bit more simple.
Yeah,
sometimes you
more
want
contained.
something a little bit more linear. So this, I think, was the in-between of the original Zelda, which was amazing for its time. But if you weren't the right age, like we were, it was a little difficult. I'm not a huge fan of the N64 and their open world stuff. It just was clunky and maps were not good and this, that. But Link to the Past is exactly that. It's a link to the past of that 16-bit era, which was great. And also the Mario RPG, I think, is another game that has aged well. So you got a little bit of everything. You got some side scrollers. You got to beat 'em up. You got an RPG. Oh, hell, I'll give you one fighting game. I would go with, if you're going to play it exclusively on Nintendo, Super Nintendo, go with Street Fighter Alpha. It was a prequel to the Street Fighter 2 and 1. It was... They had gotten their groove by then. They had gotten their groove of what was supposed to be in a fighting game. So I think, there you go. There's your one of each, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, and then a racing game, go with F-Zero.
Yeah, I loved F-Zero.
Yep.
I wasn't very good at it, but it was fun.
Yeah. I wasn't great at it either, but it just wasn't for me, but I could still appreciate that it was a good game.
Yes, and I think if you were to pick it up and play it now, it wodo be just as enjoyable of a time as it was back then if you liked it.
I believe it was a launch game too.
It was, yeah. It was to show off the what do they call that? The Mode 7, I think it was called, where they could zoom in and out from different areas. You remember all the games back in the day would have characters or backgrounds zoom in and out to show depth?
Yes.
That was a big thing. It was called Mode 7, I believe. Yeah, so F-Zero did that to show the scale of racing on these giant streets, and you have the cities beneath you. And then you had I remember the first time I remember it was actually playing Super Mario World when you beat Bowser, or when he's zooming around on his clown car, and it would zoom in and out. That was that's fancy. That was called Mode 7. So that's why a lot of early Super Nintendo games would try to use that. They used that for Star Fox actually to make it look 3D, which I thought they did a very good job with it. For the time, considering that game is almost 30 years old, it looks pretty cool.
30 years old.
Exactly. Oh, man. Well, listen, once again, we are at the end. Oh, well, listen, before we go, last week I talked about my top 10 Nintendo games, but you, Lou, have told me you have an interest in putting together your own list for the YouTube channel. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, we're going to... We're going to release something similar to what Dan did, which was the top 10 NES games on the Switch on their online services. So I figured, what the hell? Let's go ahead and do a Super Nintendo version of that. And it's going to be pretty much the same thing. It's going to be not what's the best, because there's lists that have data and numbers and all that good stuff to show you what the highest ranking one was or what sold the most. Like boring. Like this is supposed to be about what you grew up with. So it's going to be my list of Super Nintendo games that are available at the time of the recording on the Nintendo Switch. So it should be a fun time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I look forward to seeing that and getting that out there on the channel. And once again, man, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you getting me to the halfway point of Mario and Nintendo month. Unfortunately, you are not coming back next week for N64, but we did have a chance to talk about it a lot here today. So I'm glad we got to do that as well. So, but yeah, man, any final thoughts? Anything going on in the world of Power Rangers on YouTube you want to talk about today?
Well, we just released the episode called The Master Morpher. That is, if you're a Power Ranger fan, you will know what that is. If you are not, maybe you want to check it out. If you were a fan of the original Green Power Ranger, it's kind of about him in a nutshell. And then we're going to have another episode coming up previewing the 30th anniversary episode, which is coming out in about a month. From when this is going to be released. So we're getting ready for that, and then we're going to have some reactions to that because it's going to be an hour-long special on Netflix. So we kind of got our wish of please stop making these like 22-minute episodes and rushing it all together in one single episode. So an hour-long should be fun.
There it is. All right, guys. Well, listen, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget, if you like the show and you know people who would like it, let them know. Spread the word about Generation S. You are part of a generation that got to experience so many cool things in technology, in movies, in TV shows, and we talk all about it here every single week. So make sure you're letting your friends know to check the podcast out. Make sure you're checking us out on YouTube as well. We put out some YouTube exclusive content. And hey, listen, I have added some new merchandise designs. So at the description of this show at the bottom is a link to our merch store. We've got some new t-shirts out, including the latest addition to the shirt shop. Well, I don't know what I was going to say there. Is our
say something else?
I thought I was going to, so that's why I kept repeating myself. But no, the latest design for shirts on the shop is a little mushroom, and it says it's pronounced Mario.
Or is it
so
Mario? Mario.
That's one
Mario.
For you. Exactly. So that one's for you, Lou. So check it out, guys. And we're adding new designs as often as we can, as often as I come up with design ideas. So if you have an idea for a design for a shirt and you want to stick it on there, let me know, and we'll shout you out on the show for that as well. So, guys, thank you so much for listening. And Lou, thank you once again for coming on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome. But before we go, there's one thing, and you hit the nail on the head. You got to experience things in the 90s. We, as a generation, got to experience things that impacted us. There's one thing we didn't experience in the 90s. Do you know what that was?
What's that?
The Jets winning the Super Bowl. Good night, everybody.
We'll talk to you soon.
Goodbye.